The X350 generation of the Jaguar XJ was unveiled at the Paris Motor Show in 2002, and while it may look very similar to the X308 generation XJ that it replaced, it's actually a radical departure with all-aluminium architecture and air suspension. But what are they like to buy today? We'll thought we'd take a look at what goes right and wrong with these luxury saloons.
But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So check the video description for full details and to enter.
The X350 doesn't rust anywhere near as much as its predecessor, the 308. Obviously with its being all aluminium, but that doesn't mean it's completely devoid of any bodywork issues. The main trouble is that the paint can sometimes oxidise, particularly when you've got stone chip damage or any scratches. So really what you want to look for is any sort of bubbling of the paint along leading edges like the doors, bonnet and indeed boot lid. Alloy wheels across all the range from 18-inch to 20-inch size. Obviously check for things like curbing damage. There was a facelift in 2007 with the 358 model, which had different designs to the earlier cars, and sometimes those earlier models feature the later design, which is nothing too much to worry about. Side rubbing strips on the early cars, they were deleted with the 2004 model year, so keep an eye out for that. And obviously things like the plastic headlight covers fog up over time, but they can easily be brought back up. But otherwise, the bodywork on an X350 is a pretty safe proposition. So from launch, the 350 came with three engines, a 3-litre V6, 3.5 V8 and a 4.2 V8. This is the normally aspirated one. There was also the supercharged XJR model. The petrol engines are generally bulletproof as long as they're well maintained, so keep on top of fluid changes, coolant. NOx sensors are known to go wrong, and individual coil packs, and they'll throw up a kind of a limp home warning or something like that. But generally it is all about maintenance. If there is an issue with the petrol engines, it's the coolant. They are known to sort of leak coolant, but again that will be on higher, perhaps less maintained examples. If the water pump hasn't been changed, perhaps budget for that in the near future. And any associated hoses to go with it. But these V8 engines are well proven by the time you get to the X350 generation, and as a result they're very reliable indeed. Jaguar introduced a diesel model in 2005, a 2.7 V6 turbo diesel co-developed with Peugeot, and that doesn't have a great reputation for reliability. Some of that is down to simply lack of maintenance or a consistent use of short trips, which doesn't do the turbo or anything else any favours. There was only one gearbox available with the X350, and that's a 6-speed ZF box. It's smaller and lighter than the 5-speed box that was in the 308, and supposedly lower maintenance, but of course don't believe that for a second, particularly with higher mileage versions. The recommendation from the specialist is every 5 years or 60,000 miles and replace that gearbox oil. Although the actual ZF box itself didn't change fundamentally throughout the life, there was some subtle differences, so it's worth quoting the engine number and VIN number when you're getting the gearbox oil for a change. Disc brakes all round on the X350, two-pot calipers at the front. There's bigger brake calipers for the XJR models. Generally very reliable, all good solid stuff. Just got to again change the brake fluid. It's got an electronic handbrake which is known to seize, but again often through lack of use, so it's not that common, so but do keep an eye out for that. The suspension is really what we want to talk about. Even though it's a lot lighter than its predecessor, the suspension can take a pounding, so you've got to check the suspension bushes, the anti-roll bar bushes, the drop links, wishbones front and rear, upper and lower. But it's the air suspension that is the real talking point, because it is known to fail. The air compressor pump is a common failure point. They're easily replaced, but what you'll see is that the ride height will shift. It will either sink at one end or one side even, so just keep an eye out for things like that. And the dampers are the issue. If they need replacing, they're £1,000 a corner, and that's assuming you can get hold of them. The sport model dampers, this is a sport model, you can't get hold of them for love nor money, so we had to settle for the comfort. There is a coil spring conversion which you can do, but we wouldn't recommend that because it does change the entire driving experience. So unless you had to do it on the cheap, we'd still prefer to go down the air suspension option. The interiors of the X350s are actually really hard wearing. This example's done over 140,000 miles, and actually if you look at the condition of the trim and the leather, it's actually really quite good. There was a couple of options for wood. There's a kind of elm effect which this has got, and the sport models generally have that. The Sovereign and SE spec ones had burr walnut. and some of the sporty editions, particularly later on in the model's life, had aluminium finish or maybe even piano black. Not all of the models came with the touchscreen sat-nav, which this model does come with, and it's not the best system, particularly by modern day standards. They can sometimes lose the DVD and need to replace that. You can upgrade it with Apple CarPlay and things like that, which is an option worth looking at if you're into that kind of stuff. The trim issues are really the big things to look out for. This has got the sagging headlining. The sunglasses latch here has failed basically, so we're holding up with a bit of luxurious blue tack on this particular model. The air conditioning is also known to be temperamental. There's actually 2 zones with that, so it can fail just on one side. It has been known you can rectify it with simply a reverse flush through the heater matrix, but if that doesn't work, I'm afraid it's a dashboard out job, so do keep an eye out to make sure that the heating and aircon is working on both sides. Keep an eye out for warnings on the central display unit there on the Speedo. We recently got the traction control and ABS failure warnings up. That's not an uncommon thing actually. And it's often just down to an ABS sensor, and indeed that's exactly what it was. Easily replaced and a pretty quick job to do as well. But yeah, overall inside the car it's a really straightforward exercise. Just keep an eye out for any sort of nicks or tears on the leather and you're good to go. So now we've shown you what to look for. Which model should you go for and how much should you pay for it? Well, for me, it's all about personal preference. I prefer the sport models because I actually like the de-chromed look, but for those that want a more traditional look, then SE and Sovereign specs are the way to go for. Values for 350s, well, they're all over the place at the moment. You can still get really quite tatty condition ones for probably less than £3,000, but really nice condition, good spec ones can be north of £10,000. Don't be afraid of mileage. This one's a really high mileage one, no bad thing for it. If anything, a low mileage car might suggest lack of use. And as we mentioned earlier, diesel models in particular do like to be used. As for engines, unless you really need the fuel economy of that diesel model and you're doing lots of miles, I'd tend to gravitate towards the petrol engines. The 3-litre V6 is not underpowered by any means. It's plenty brisk enough in this car. It's smooth, it's refined, and it's actually not bad on fuel. The 3.5 V8, it kind of falls in between 2 stools as far as I'm concerned, so I'd always go for the 4.2 V8. The 400 brake horsepower XJR probably wasn't abundant in supply, and there's plenty of demand for them, and I think that's keeping the prices of those at a premium. So essentially, the X350, there's not a lot you need to be afraid of. Yes, it will need lots of maintenance, but the good news is about a 350, like a lot of Jaguars, there are plenty of specialists, there's great club support, and dampers aside, parts availability is really good for the 350, so now's the time to buy one of these fantastic luxury saloons.